Hello, and welcome once again to RFA Insider. I'm Eugene, and you might be wondering why we're calling this episode 7B. That's because when we recorded episode 7, which was supposed to be a special episode in honor of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month, the discussion went way over, so we decided to make 2 episodes out of it. The first half of this episode about Asian American representation in U.S. pop culture came out as 7A last week, and the second half focuses on our experiences as Asian Americans in journalism. So, after a brief pause for our contact info, we'll return to our conversation with Charlie, Boer, Amy, and myself. Stay tuned. You're listening to the RFA Insider podcast, made by 2 real-life staffers at Radio Free Asia.
If you'd like to send us feedback, there are many ways you can do this.
You can send us an email at insider@rfa.org.
You can comment on our webpage at rfa.org/English/insider. Just click on the episode you're listening to and write your comment below.
Or you can send us a tweet at RFA Insider or visit us in person.
No, don't visit us in person.
Right, don't visit us in person. But anyway, we really want to hear from you.
So tune in every other Friday and we'll take you behind the scenes.
And tell you what the news really means here at RFA Insider.
We're at an hour.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. We better move on.
Okay. All right. Moving along, let's get on to the next segment, which is how it's made.
어떻게 만들었지? 他们是打嘞？怎么做的？
How it's made.
All right, so I think one of the strongest stereotypes surrounding Asian Americans is that they're all science and math-minded and invariably become doctors, lawyers, engineers, and scientists. So what better way to celebrate this Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month than by sharing the ways in which we've broken down some stereotypes and disappointed our parents in the process by pursuing journalism. So I will be our moderator today for my seniors in journalism, and I will start us off with question number 1. So Asian parents, particularly first-generation immigrants, tend to nudge their children towards STEM careers, which tend to be associated with respect and financial security. So I'm curious, did your parents subscribe to this belief, and how much did their expectations influence your choice of study and career?
So I will answer with yes and yes.
All right.
So I'm from a family of Thai doctors. Both of my parents finished med school in Thailand, and they emigrated over here, and I was born, and my sister and I both grew up in this family of Thai doctors. My aunt was a doctor. The community that we interacted with growing up were kids of Thai American doctors who had come here from Thailand. So, yeah, I mean that was it. And you know, our parents wanted us to do something that they knew, and they knew that it was safe and stable. So I was pre-med. I was pre-med at NYU. Also, during the time I was growing up, I got into music. So playing the saxophone, not violin. I played saxophone at not piano.
But there's nothing wrong with violin and
there's
piano.
There's nothing wrong with violin and
Yes,
piano.
thank you.
Yeah. I played saxophone since 8 years old, and actually the story behind that is my mom, who sang in her free time at these gatherings of Thai American doctors in the New York City area. They would hire a band,
cool.
a Thai band that played the songs that they would sing. And in this band was a sax player, Kun Prapat. So because of him, my mom said, Charlie, I'm going to take you to take sax lessons. And I'm like, great. I was doing anything else, and it kind of stuck. So finished high school, thinking I was going to be a doctor. I think that's even in my yearbook. I wrote, I'm going to be a doctor.
That's your senior quote?
But actually, my yearbook quote was a jazz reference. Since I played saxophone, I think my yearbook quote was, "It ain't in the horn, man. It's only me." So that's from Charlie Parker. Okay. But anyhow, so I was pre-med, and I went to NYU. So part of this pre-med program, it was a BA/MD pre-med program, so 8-year non-accelerated. So they accepted me into NYU Med the day they accepted me into the undergrad. So I said, great. I'm just going to study something in the arts, and then I'll just go straight to med school and I'll be a doctor. But lo and behold, that first year at NYU, living with film majors and drama majors and playing music, I didn't make it through. But I did come out with a minor in chemistry. But I chose to minor in back then they called it print journalism. So that was my major.
What was the parental reaction once you pulled out of that program?
Very good question. So when I decided to drop out of the med program and return the free ticket to med school, of course, my parents were very, very disappointed. Very, very disappointed. So, but I finished school and then I did an internship at PBS, and then I escaped them and moved to Thailand for a year.
Oh, cool.
And then I will continue that story with the second question.
Okay. All right. So for me, so my background as a biracial Asian American probably puts me in a somewhat different circumstance than everybody else. I'm assuming any Asian parent pressure would have only been coming from my dad, not from my mom. And also, my parents divorced when I was very young, so I was raised by my mom and stepfather, neither of whom are Asian. So let me just say that, again, without assuming anything about your experiences, I never had the stereotypical Asian tiger mom that maybe you had. I'm not sure. So in college, I started out as a biochemistry major with an eye on becoming pre-med. And so, I think all three of us were in chemistry to an extent. But then I got to organic chemistry and realized that, that wasn't my thing.
I loved organic chemistry. I loved it so much. I took it twice. Because I had to take it twice. I failed the first time.
I like you, loved Orgo, and I actually went on to teach it as a teaching assistant.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we'll come to that later.
I hated it. I preferred the pecan aspect of it, and the reason was because in high school, chemistry was my favorite class, and my chemistry teacher said that chemistry is like a language because it has a grammar.
Yes.
And
yes.
It turns out, though, that I didn't like the scientific aspects of it, and I probably liked the language aspects of it. Because after, when I was a biochemistry major, I got involved with the campus newspaper called The Public Asian, which was geared toward the Asian American community. And then I liked it so much that I started writing a column for it regularly. So that's my first experience with journalism. While I didn't work professionally in journalism for quite a while, after that, that was the start.
Okay, Boer, and you?
Okay, sorry. The question was, how did our parents respond? Was that right?
Yes.
Okay. So my situation is a little different, but also a little similar, I guess. I don't think they were particularly... my parents, as I mentioned, were graduate students. They're computer engineers. And there is this saying in Chinese, 学好数理化，走遍天下都不怕, which means if you learn physics, maths, and chemistry well, you can travel the world without any fear, right? So,
Interesting.
So and we were talking about comedy earlier. It's very funny. I don't know if you guys know the comedian Sheng Wang. He's Taiwanese American, and he talks about how his parents immigrated to the U.S. to provide a better life for their child, and he went into stand-up comedy. And little did they know, there was this whole other way you could suffer that they didn't even know about. So I don't think it was quite that bad. I don't think my parents were thrilled, but I actually majored in chemistry because I liked it, not because my parents pushed me into it. It was not my favorite subject in high school. I knew nothing about it. My roommate freshman year was pre-med, and I just thought she was so cool, and I was like, I'll take some classes with you, sure. And actually, I actually ended up really maybe because of the language thing. I don't know. So I worked as a chemist before becoming a journalist, actually. And I think in a scientific career, it becomes very clear very early that you really have to have a PhD. You really have to go on and really have talent for it, which I just did not.
It's a total commitment.
It is.
Right?
It is. Yeah. It is. But the way it teaches you to think about the world and to assess things and to have a certain order. I really appreciate those aspects of it. I was quite. By the way, Charlie, your mom sounds so cool. I have to say. But no, I think the fear for my parents, especially being first generation, is how are you going to make a living and support yourself? And I've just been very, very lucky. And the fact that I did come from a background that is not super common for journalists, although there are certainly, some journalists who come from a science background, but it's not the most common thing. It really helped me sort of get my foot in the door because I could come at it with, explaining a part of the world that a lot of, not a whole lot of journalists do.
So you brought some expertise into the journalism.
So my first job in journalism was actually on the books and arts desk at the New Republic. And I wrote, and the piece that I wrote had been a review of a memoir by an organic chemist Nobel Prize winner. And, so it was quite a competitive advantage, right? Like, who else is going to be able to write about this stuff? But to your point, Eugene, I think there is quite a lot of unity of, the endeavor towards understanding, right? And I think that's kind of what we've got in common. Like, journalism is about the endeavor to understand the world we live in, with respect to what's going on. Science is the endeavor to understand the world with respect to how it works. So I think maybe, so for me, I think maybe those things are kind of what, united my interests. And then from there, I was actually able to, get some pretty cool news jobs. And so my parents were like, yeah, all right, fine. Like, you can, you can pay the rent. So
your parents want you to be able to support yourself. But I think it's prevalent in Asian culture as well that the children are their investment. So they want you to be able to support them in the future as well, to some extent, right?
I don't know about support, but I do think, at least in the community I was a part of, I don't think journalism is seen as like an unprestigious thing necessarily, right? My parents having, like I said, come in the 90s in this sort of time of opening up of China, I think they see and saw the value of this thing, and it's not like I went to become a stand-up comedian. You know what I mean? So there is a level of like respect that you can still command with all the uncles and aunties, which kind of goes very far in in a lot of our parents' communities. So
I guess I was curious about Charlie's parents' reaction to him pulling out of his med school program, because I never had any talent for math or science. So my parents were pragmatic, and they were like, all right, like, my mom was a fan of Oprah, so she was like, oh, you can do like publishing, like O Magazine with your degree.
Really sweet.
Yeah.
I hadn't decided on journalism right at the moment that I dropped med school. It was, I was going to finish up the journalism major, and I was playing music. And then I bought myself some time by going to Thailand right after graduation and right after my internship at PBS. There weren't any jobs at the time. So I bought myself some time by signing up with a teach abroad program in Thailand. That was with Harvard Institute for International Development, which I just told them, yeah, it's through Harvard. It's through Harvard.
That goes a really long way. Yeah. If it's like a brand that they've heard of,
that's very important.
It's really important. But even that can be. I'm so sorry. I'm like manipulating.
No.
So my first news job was that I'd gotten an internship with The Economist. And I think the only reason it was, but like even then, my mom was like, "Couldn't you just do this like part time while you're working?" I'm like, "No, like it's like a real job."
But as, so I bought myself a year by going to Thailand, and since I grew up going to Thailand, they felt okay with that. It was kind of going to be my gap year after university before I really figure out what I was going to do. I was already interested in photojournalism by then. I had a dark room in my bathroom and everything.
Nice.
But in shooting stuff, I want to say I bought a Leica, but I guess my doctor parents bought me a Leica when I graduated high school. So I was doing that. But because I went to a place that they were familiar with, i.e. Thailand, but I wasn't staying with family, that was sort of my year where I took to figure things out. But yeah, I mean, were they worried? I mean, I guess they were. And that as Asian parents, they're going to worry. They want to make sure that you can put a roof over your head. And during that time, I took care of myself. The small salary that I got from being an English teacher in a Thai public school, it was enough. And but that was a really big discovery period for me. And also with them being on the other side of the world, they felt comfortable, so they were okay.
So question number 2, kind of leading off this discussion, how does your family perceive journalism and journalists? And if they're first gen, how much of their perception is influenced by their home countries?
It's difficult with like Chinese parents, I think, because it's changed so much. And I think there's a lot of, like, you know, there's not really much, like, trustworthy. There's not a free press in China. And my parents, I think, still to this day get most of their information from, like, WeChat. And right, like, it's... and I remember growing up watching, like, when we used to go back to China, like, watching CCTV and that sort of thing. I don't think they necessarily hold it in high regard because the media environment that they know is so problematic and sort of fractured. And then this, like, the Western media is equally foreign seeming, you know, at this point, because they've lived in the States for a long time. So you're sort of an outsider looking in no matter which way. So yeah, I definitely don't think they hold it in high regard. But then, you know, if it's something that they've heard of and seems halfway legitimate, then it's okay.
For me, I don't think my parents, they didn't understand what journalism was. They didn't think much about it. They probably just saw it as something that they consume or read as with anyone else. So maybe that helped in a way because they didn't ask too many questions because they didn't understand it. And, you know, I'd send them clips, you know, with my name on it sometimes because I was a photojournalist. And then, you know, they were like, oh, wow, you know, that's... but in terms of what was really the mission of journalism and whatnot, I don't think they ever spent too much time thinking or discussing that or politics.
Charlie, can I ask, your parents primarily consume, like, U.S. media, right?
Yes.
Because I think with my parents, one of the barriers is, like, I don't think they read too many things like long form or, like, investigative stories in English, you know?
They'll know the evening news because that during the time, and they know the presenters, you know, they know they at that time it was like Peter Jennings and Barbara Walters, you know, like those big network names, which Amy may not know, but Ted Koppel, you know, so that's what they knew, television journalism, you know, but that's not, this is a question I would get a lot from their friends, you know, when they said, oh, our son Charlie's a journalist now. And the question would always be, what channel are you on? So again, they didn't understand it.
Yeah. I think that's, like, same. Like, you know, it's a lot of television journalism. I don't think, maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, and maybe this isn't true, but, like, I don't know that they, like, necessarily read stuff that I've reported on or edited and felt a real sense of enjoyment from reading it, not because it's, you know...
Do you send them stuff?
No, because I used to, and I think over a course of, like, a 15-year career, like, my dad has maybe told me that he enjoyed maybe, like, 2 stories.
Okay. Well, so in my case, my father, prior to coming to the U.S., was actually a journalist in Korea, and he worked for the Jungang Ilbo, which is one of the big newspapers in South Korea.
That's a big one.
And when he moved to the U.S., what he did at first was to get his master's in journalism from Columbia University.
Oh,
wow.
So he has a high opinion of journalists, but also you have to understand the environment that he was coming from. In the 70s, being a newspaper reporter in Korea was like a big deal, and people would go out of their way to, like, do favors for reporters, so they would not be the target of like negative press or anything like that. But the thing is, like, after he got his journalism degree in the U.S., he didn't become a journalist. He went off and started working for the government, doing various things. Most recently, conference interpreting for Korean and English.
So he didn't do journalism in the U.S.
No.
He left it in Korea.
Yes. So when I told you that I cut my teeth in journalism in university doing the publication, he's like, well, why are you wasting your time with that? You should be studying for your chemistry stuff because that's more important. And then when I actually started working as a journalist professionally, that was for an English language radio station in Seoul called TBS EFM. And going back to what you guys were all saying about name recognition being important, like
brand.
He's like, you're in the middle of nowhere in a market that is so small, working for the smallest station, and you're making no money. If I had been working for, like, maybe CNN or the New York Times, he probably would have been really happy about that. But I think the way he viewed it was just like, you're just wasting your time in Korea and you should get on with your life. Long story short, I think he likes that I'm employed gainfully.
All right. Okay. So moving on. A Pew Research Center survey of 12,000 U.S.-based journalists found that only 3% surveyed identified as Asian. So I'm curious if you've ever felt typecast, so to speak, as an Asian American journalist and expected to cover certain beats, or experienced any obstacles or like things that have held you back in your career?
I started my career in Asia working for the Western media. So I didn't feel typecast at all. And if anything, I felt that I was at an advantage. You know, I think AP hired me when they did was because I look Thai, speak Thai, you know, so looks like a duck, walks like a duck. But, you know, but you know, so I can get the access and blend in, not as foreign press. So that in many ways was an advantage. So, and you know, working for a wire, I was a photographer. Working for the wire during my early years, I got into all kinds of situations and covered all beats. So it was always, since I was, you know, we're one of few working overseas, so it's an opportunity to get involved in coverage because there just wasn't people. So no, didn't feel typecast, and I felt lucky that I had those opportunities to work on stories.
Yeah, sort of similarly, I've been really, really lucky. I've mostly worked for foreign media, but based here in the U.S. So I actually, it's very funny because even though I'm American, I was actually a foreign correspondent for most of my career just in America. And that was actually quite helpful. Yeah, it was actually quite helpful because there's no expectation that I'm going to go and like, you know, only cover Asian American or Asian American issues. I'm covering like America for mostly UK audiences. So that was really nice. And then prior to this job, I was in an editing role, which was really, really nice too, because I got to sort of commission stories not only about just, you know, America writ large, but things that I was interested in, whether they be Asia specific or not. And it's funny because Eugene, you were telling me that before I joined, you had seen that the thing I was covering previously was mostly U.S. politics.
Yes.
And I got to do, you know, foreign reporting, like actual foreign reporting.
But I just wanted to also say that, like, when I saw that, you know, I was like, well, wait, they brought her on and she's not talking about something Asian related? That's pretty cool. Like, wow.
Yeah.
So normally, I mean, you do see, like, on like news outlets, they'll hire the Asian person to talk about Asia. It was just striking to me that, like, they, you know, the BBC did that. So
yeah, I think that's interesting because I that's not really, but again, I'm sort of coming from it a bit as an outsider.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like for me, like I got to, you know, cover like gangs in Mexico and did the 2016 election, and I even did. Just don't tell anyone, like a little bit of reporting in China when I wasn't supposed to.
You committed journalism in China.
I did. It was quite a sin. So yeah, no, I've just been like really, really lucky.
Yeah.
This question kind of came about because as a journalism student, I would tell people like, oh, I want to cover like Asian affairs. I want to like move to Asia and then report on news there. And the response would be very much like, oh, right, like makes sense. You know?
Jeez. Wow. All right. So in my case, to answer this question, so I also don't feel typecasted, but every single outlet I worked at was majority Asian, I think. So, I mean, I was the sports guy on the radio station because I understood sports the most. But, I mean, I didn't feel typecast because I actually enjoyed that. So I think this is an important question, though, and maybe just it's not the best question for the three of us, perhaps. Like, I'm sure there are people that do feel typecasted, and you know, there's an organization called the Asian American Journalists Association that was set up to deal with issues like this. So the fact that it exists makes me wonder if this is more of an issue in U.S. newsrooms.
Yeah, I think it's also like an issue that's not just for Asian Americans, right? Like I've definitely in previous jobs where I was editing, you know, had a lot of conversations with my other colleagues where it's like a very fine line that you're trying to tread, you know, if you're a Black reporter in the U.S. Like, on the one hand, there are things that you understand about that experience and that community that others don't have access to. But on the other hand, it's really not fair if all you're doing all the time is, you know, covering Black issues, and if that's not what you want to be doing. And I think, and same with, you know, Hispanic reporters that I've worked with, and it's just, it's a difficult sort of needle to thread, right? Like there has to, a
lot of times, I mean, there's stories that need to be covered, right? And it depends on who's available on the bench to send to cover the stories. I mean, if news organizations have a diverse staff, they may typecast. But in so many situations that I've worked in anyway, we don't have enough people. Like sometimes you just end up sending who you can send, and if that person happened to be Asian or that person happened to be Black, I mean that implies that we had a diverse bench to begin with, which is something I think we want to strive for. So you kind of have a roster of journalists who work for an organization who are available to bring out those, different voices and stories, and also, send a journalist who wouldn't normally cover a certain story to cover it.
I also, Charlie, I'd love to get your take on this. The other thing that I find as like somebody who's assigning, it's something that I've actually had to think about in more recent years, even like in the U.S. But when it comes to safety, like I know that in the last couple of years in my previous job, like we actually had to think a lot about this issue when it came to stuff in, like covering protests and Trump rallies. And sorry, I'm not trying to get political, but like there were definitely certain situations where you're like, I definitely don't want to send, or definitely do want to send a particular person from a safety perspective, or like a person, and I think that's kind of relevant, kind of where it's really actually quite relevant for us, because oftentimes if we're sending someone from Washington, it's a little bit easier in places that have very difficult environments than if you're sending someone who has a life in a country that is where it's not safe to be a journalist. I'm
glad that we're thinking about this now, and this is being thought about more now in newsrooms. But what you just said just reminded me of a situation of my own coverage. When I was covering the unrest in Indonesia in 1998, the riots were against the ethnic Chinese in Indonesia. So I do have a Chinese face, and I was going out and covering these stories, with my cameras and everything, and my colleagues who worked with me, who were Indonesian, they would say to me, you know what they're saying? It's like, that guy's brave for like being out here shooting these riots. People were looting stores and whatnot. So again, it wasn't being talked about back then. Like my safety was never questioned. Like, hey, but I'm glad it's something that is considered now.
Right.
All right. So for the last question, are there any specific areas of coverage in which you'd particularly like to hear more Asian voices?
In 2024, I actually see a lot of Asian journalists excelling in almost all beats and formats in news, in U.S. newsrooms anyway. I was part of the White House pool for about 12 years in the early 2000s. And even back then, there were times where the pool on Air Force One, there's 12 of us, or 12, 13 of us, we would have like 5 Asian people. John Yang, who I think is now with PBS, was the NBC correspondent. He'd be on, I'd be on, the AFP and Reuters photographer would be Asian. So we'd kind of think it was funny that, hey, before even people were talking about representation, we were there. And, and fast forward to now, the CBS News correspondent, Weijia Jiang, she was the one that was having the back and forth with Trump a couple of years ago during press conferences.
Why is this a global competition to you if everyday Americans are still losing their lives?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world, and maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
She's going to be the White House Correspondents Association president next year.
Oh, wow.
Great.
And Patsy Widakuswara from VOA, who's the chief White House correspondent, and, she's pushing for access, with foreign governments and with our handlers, So I should say U.S. handlers. And even with photojournalists, Nicole Tong, Marcus Yam, who shoots for the L.A. Times, they're out there covering conflict. And so I feel that in terms of Asian voices, Asian perspectives, maybe I can also say these are excellent journalists who happen to be Asian, But the other thing I wanted to say I'd like to see more of is more coverage of Asian American stories, and not just during this month.
Yes.
NBC News Digital actually has a section, an Asian America content section that they cover stories that involve the Asian American community and give voice to Asian American, creators and, business owners and people. So I think that is happening more, and it's probably just realizing that the audience is out there in terms of the people who want to read about their own communities and for those outside. I mean, I think a lot of people, if you look at the decisions being made now, even in advertising, I'm coming back to America after being away for like 10 years. I turn on the TV now and I see commercials with Asians in these commercials so much more now than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
When I was out in Asia the last time. So I think it's good. And again, it's these talented people happen to be Asian.
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. I think I see a lot of my colleagues who are just doing really amazing work. I do think, at least in front of the camera or on the page, I don't know I can't think of very many like conflict correspondents or foreign correspondents. Like the people you see covering wars or having, like going off. It's never really an Asian face, and it's kind of surprising, right? When there's this huge conflict going on in Myanmar right now, and one of the things that I really hope I can do here is to help tell those stories that many of our colleagues are telling just in their native language, but bring that to an English language audience so that maybe somebody will pay attention in Western media and say, oh, hey, this Burmese reporter is, doing this amazing work covering maybe the conflict in their own country, but certainly would be able to cover the conflict going on somewhere else, or do really great foreign reporting in Europe or, Latin America or wherever. Whenever you think of foreign correspondents in Western media, I think you don't tend to think of folks who look like us, I guess.
I know what you're saying, because I started my career overseas and surrounded by foreign correspondents, right?
Exactly.
And I was probably the only Asian foreign correspondent among Western foreign correspondents where I was at during my time, But I think there's different factors going on. I think as editors, we can, as Asian editors, we're in a position to, as Boer says, to seek out those voices and perspectives, to present those stories to audiences, right? So that's one thing that we can do. The other thing is, I think it's on an upswing again. News organizations, not just the wires now. I mean, you're seeing news organizations investing in sending,
exactly,
more diverse correspondents abroad to cover the news. I know the Washington Post has a woman named Rebecca Tan, I think it is. She's based in Singapore, and she covers Southeast Asia, and
I definitely think in East Asia reporting from the big newspapers, that's been quite a bright spot. The Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times all have just really great Asian reporters. One of the former reporters for the FT is now standing as a Labour candidate in the election in the UK, which is actually so cool, right? Like you go on from a journalism career to representing the constituency. But I think that is actually one place. I agree with you, Charlie. It's on the upswing, but I think it is quite a new phenomenon. It's more pronounced in the East Asia, like China, Taiwan. I don't really see it as much in Southeast Asia, and when there's actually quite a lot of opportunity, and there should be nothing stopping these correspondents from then going on to do really great reporting, anywhere else in the world. The way you often see really, really good reporters of every other color, going off to report on conflict or...
in terms of covering war and conflict, Marcus Yam, he's Malaysian, but he's been working for the Los Angeles Times for a few years now, and he's been at every conflict, Ukraine, Gaza, and Nicole Tung, who's a freelancer based in Istanbul, she's covered the Arab Spring. So these aren't people we necessarily see their faces, but their bylines are very prominent in covering these stories. And they also speak, and they do workshops, and they talk about their experiences. So I think it's we're in the midst of it, I think.
Okay. I did answer this question, but I think I maybe hit a different angle. But as far as hearing more Asian voices, I find that often there's a tendency to go after the expert opinion on certain things, and often, even if it's an Asian subject, they'll go to non-Asian people as the experts, and that happens a lot. again, nothing against these experts because they're experts for a reason, but I think maybe we need to like divorce the voice of authority with the specific demographic.
Yeah. I mean, and part of it is on us too. Like we need to, right?
I would also love to see, I think the only two Asian journalists, so to speak, that I know of are J. Kenji Lopez-Alt and Eric Kim of New York Times, but they're both in the food section of New York Times. But I'd love to see more like softer like lifestyle beats being covered by Asians, because I guess like when I see like things like how to cook like the best like bao bun, then like I know it's like signaling to me like, oh, that's like not targeted for me, right? Or like people like me. That's for people who like don't know anything about it.
Right.
So,
a lot of times when you do see reviews on like Asian food, for example, it'll be like,
Yes, we need more Asian restaurant critics.
Or like
Asian restaurant critics. Or
no, I mean, but like there was like a New York Times article a few years back that was like introducing to this new trend of bubble tea, which like it was 2002, but it actually came out in like 2017 or
wasn't
something.
Wasn't the title like "What are these blobs in my tea" or something?
So I mean, I think that if they had run that past anybody who is Asian, they would have been like, you can't go with that headline, or you can't, it's not a new thing that you've discovered suddenly. So, But on that note, I think it's time to draw this discussion to a close. So for Amy Lee, I'm Eugene Hwang.
RFA Insider will be back next week, and we'll return to our original format. So until then,
see ya.
Thank you.
Ooh, thank you guys.